Welcome to this BeeCraft podcast recorded in December 2025 with Professor Lars Chittka, bee scientist and world-famous author of The Mind of a Bee, an exploration of the tiny but highly sophisticated brains of bees. As co-editors of BeeCraft, Rickitt and Stephen Fleming had visited Lars at his laboratories in Queen Mary University, London, to speak with him and learn about the research projects of 5 of his students. An article about that visit and the astonishing research at the lab was published in BeeCraft in June 2023. Lars recently surprised us by revealing that he had won Best Actor Award in an environmental film to be released in early 2026, so we were eager to find out more about that and his latest work. He generously agreed to be interviewed, and this podcast is the result. We started by asking him how he had come to appear in the film.
Yeah, that's an interesting story for a scientist. So the director, Oseli Hanna, had conceived the project before knowing about me and my science. And he's a UK-Mexican dual national and resides in Mexico City. And so he began casting around for actors to play a bee scientist, and then did a bit more research, and well, I guess found out about me, and just had this crazy idea without knowing that I travel regularly to Mexico to ask me, hey, do you want to play a scientist in a film? And I said, basically, I have no acting experience to speak of, but yes, we can give it a try. And so he ran the script by me, and I read it and thought that was an interesting challenge, because I was asked to play a kind of scientist very different from how I see myself. So I couldn't just enact myself. So I said, yes, let's give it a go. And so it was a very unusual challenge for someone with my training, but lots of fun. And he liked what I had to deliver. So in the end, we're all happy with the product.
Hi Lars, Richard here. I've got a bit of experience in film and telly, and I have been used to in the past working on projects where specialists were hired to give a project some credibility, particularly to look at the script. So often it would be historians or scientists and so on. So I'm interested to know, when you read the script, what you thought about the science, and were there things that you felt you had to say or that you wanted to change from the point of view of perhaps making it a little bit more realistic or accurate?
There were a few such things. So the story is about, well, we're zooming forward a few years. Everyone's heard of the global crisis of bees and pollination services in many parts of the world. And so this is a fictional scenario in which it is imagined that the last remaining bees of the planet reside in a tiny part of Mexico. And this European scientist comes in with a crazy plan to rescue these bees and then repopulate the planet with genetically engineered bees. And needless to say, as you can probably sense, this is not going to go particularly well. But yeah, there were a few aspects of the science where the director was very flexible in letting me make adjustments and indeed improvise in some cases to generate some more scientifically realistic scenarios in the dialogue and so on.
And we're all used to working around bees in our daily work and hobby. But did this create any practical problems during the filmmaking?
So, I mean, he had more than one bee expert on board. There was me and then several lovely Mexicans as well who knew their way around bees of multiple species, in fact. So he was well advised by a team of scientists who in some cases also did some of the acting.
So there weren't any problems with insects, bees, stings, swarms, any of those sorts of
No one got stung, to my knowledge. So we filmed in part with stingless bees, but there was also some bumblebee filming going on. But no one was hospitalized as a result of anaphylactic shock during the filmmaking.
And it's a science fiction, isn't it? So I mean, and it's, do you think it's a realistic portrayal, perhaps to a degree, of something that's could happen in the future, or is it really just based in science fiction and fantasy?
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I think the scenario that all bees globally will become extinct at some point in the next few years or decades is unrealistic. Because obviously there are a good number of bee species that, including the familiar honeybee, that has a lobby and is quite well looked after by beekeepers. And of course, there are a few cosmopolitan species of bumblebees, including our large earth bumblebee, Bombus terrestris, that does reasonably well. So the scenario that all of them will be almost or entirely eradicated in the near future is probably unrealistic, but the that doesn't mean that there's no risk and no threat. So, of course, many species of bees, especially local native bees, are threatened with extinction in many parts of the world. And so this film, I think, takes this scenario to a slightly more menacing level. And in that sense, of course, it is science fiction.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing it. I've only seen the trailer so far, but it's clearly been very well received so far. As Stephen said, the film's won some awards, and you've won an award. How can those of us who are interested in seeing it get to see the film?
So it'll be released, I think, publicly next year, probably on YouTube and possibly also in some local cinemas for general viewing. But I'll keep you up to date with the release date. If you'd like to see the film to prepare an article, I can make a link available to you guys.
Yes,
Great,
please.
I think yes, please, we'd love that. Some Christmas viewing.
Lars, since we met you, you've been doing a lot of traveling, talking presumably about your book. I've seen you in Northern Ireland. I've seen you in England. I've seen you in Copenhagen. It's taken you lots of places. I'm only talking about the nearby countries, but it's taken you much further afield than that, hasn't it?
That's true. I've had a lot of invitations in recent years to various faraway lands, including this year. I've given multiple presentations in Mexico, a few in Ecuador, a number in the United States. One of my most remarkable visits a few years ago was a visit to the Dalai Lama's residence in Dharamshala in northern India, where there was a conference about animal consciousness, where I was one of the invitees talking about my crazy bee science. So that was a very unusual and very moving experience.
Do you know what he made of it?
Um, I don't know specifically what he made of it. He does have a copy of my book now. He is generally, I think, as far as as religious leaders are concerned, very open to debates with scientists and has a long history of doing so, and is on record for saying um, that if scientific evidence is counter to religious views, then we'll have to adjust the religious views, which I think is fairly unique among religious leaders. So far, I haven't been invited to the Pope or some Taliban leaders for a similar discussion. So not as much open-minded as there, I think.
Well, maybe after they'd heard this podcast, you will.
So I think in general, he is very interested in discussions with scientists. He is very vocal about his respect for the natural world and animals, and what, of course, this also means for human well-being. So I think in general, he enjoyed this discussion with a variety of different scientists who are all in various ways interested in animal minds and the way in which they think and feel. And that includes, of course, most likely our bees that we're all interested in.
Has the impact of your book surprised you? It's been translated, I believe, into 13 languages now. Did you ever imagine that would happen?
I didn't, no. So, I mean, I have a many decades long experience with writing dry scientific articles for my colleagues about the kinds of experiments that we do. And if you're lucky, then some of them might over their lifetime be cited 100 times and so on. But the fact that this book has been read by thousands and thousands of people all over the world is a really lovely surprise. I wrote it with the idea of, well, general scientifically interested laymen in mind. So the idea was to reach out from my narrow sort of ivory tower environment to the larger population. But yes, I hadn't anticipated that so many people would enjoy it.
When we last spoke, you said that you're about 80% certain that bees are conscious sentient beings, but that it couldn't be answered by scientific formal proof. Have you had any further thoughts on that? Would you raise the 80%? Has anything changed your mind on that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to put a number on something that really we can only judge with a certain probability. And just to explain again, we do not have access, of course, to any animal's mind because we cannot talk to them. That's the same challenge with our domestic pets, our dogs and cats, as it is with bees. We can't ask them, what are you thinking? What have you been dreaming? We can't ask them what they're currently feeling. So all these judgments have to be, rather than expecting formal certainty, all these judgments are to some extent educated guesswork. And so what we as scientists can do is to draw together lines of evidence from different kinds of psychological, behavioral, and neurobiological experiments to make that educated guess a little more scientifically grounded. And given all this, it still looks to me like fairly likely that bees can solve certain challenges that we put in their way by thinking rather than by trial and error, that they can plan for the immediate future, that they can think about past memories, and that there is at least very suggestive evidence of emotion-like states. And all of this, to me, indeed adds up to a very high probability that these are conscious creatures. But I still can't say that this has now moved from 80 to 100% certainty or probability.
Lars, when we came to see you a few years ago, I got quite excited because your lab at the university is like everybody's idea of a science lab. Funnily enough, perhaps you might see in a science fiction film. You know, there are people in there in white coats, and there are all sorts of contraptions held together with string and tape and what have you. And you can see that there are lots of experiments and tests being done physically using live bees. Now, what's really changed since we came to see you, what's come to the fore is AI, of course. And I'm wondering if you can see any applications for that in helping you in your quest of understanding the sentience of bees.
So I might be missing a wonderful opportunity here, but I am actually quite proud of the relative simplicity of the kinds of experimental setups that we and my many junior team members are using, because many of these puzzle boxes that we're using, many of the artificial flowers and so on, are things that anyone, any master student, any PhD student can develop in the course of their project. And so that gives them a kind of ownership of their project where they can do something that's done nowhere else in the world. And that means they can also develop their own independent science right from the start, rather than sort of being a tiny piece of a puzzle in what perhaps I'm interested in. And you guys in this article that you wrote portrayed this very nicely, because you gave every student some room to sort of explain their own project. And I think in that we are, with this perhaps somewhat old-fashioned approach, are now quite unique in the world, where everyone sort of most people buy their equipment off the shelf, and do their pipetting with prefabricated equipment and so on. And I like the technological simplicity and the fact that this gives my junior young scientists autonomy about what they want to do. And I haven't yet found an original way in which AI can be used to make this approach more powerful, beyond the obvious things like literature searches and writing a first draft of your next conference abstract and so on. I'm quite happy with our old-fashioned approach, using fairly simple technology for the reasons I just explained.
Well, it was great fun to see. We really enjoyed ourselves, and hopefully we can come along again and see some of your new students.
Anytime, you're very welcome to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
What sort of work is going on at the moment, Lars? Anything that you can reveal to us?
Lots, of course. So one of the ways in which we're trying to explore the question of bees' emotion-like states, their sentience, and its natural relevance, is asking whether bees forage deliberately for nectars that contain psychoactive substances. So you might have heard that there are a good number of plants that contain caffeine in their nectar, others contain nicotine, and there's actually a good variety of other substances, including alcohol, in some floral nectars. And it seems that in some cases, bees deliberately seek out such substances. And the question then becomes, why would they deliberately search for mind-altering substances if there isn't a mind to alter? So that's one question. Other students are interested in the evolution of floral color and how colors in different habitats contrast well against their background, using the bee-specific rather than human-specific perceptual models of color vision. Bees, of course, see the world very differently from how we do, and that will influence how bees evolve depending on whether they're presenting them, how flowers evolve depending on whether they present their display against green foliage or alpine scree or desert sand and so on. And so we're looking at these floral advertising strategies and how bees respond to how well flowers contrast against various backgrounds as well. I have one more student who's very interested in male bees. And of course, they're historically dismissed as just flying penises and not much else. And it actually turns out that they can learn, not just in honeybees, where even though the drones appear pretty hopeless in many aspects, they can actually learn a route to and from their hive, because if they don't find a queen, then of course they must return to their origin. And in bumblebees, they're even smarter than that, because they also in nature visit flowers, and so must learn all the many things about flowers that their sisters, the workers, must also learn. And So one student is looking at how male bumblebees open puzzle boxes, for example.
Has your work still continue with bumblebees, or are you back with some honeybees as well? Because you had to stop using honeybees because of health and safety at the university, isn't that right?
We had to stop having our own colonies, but we can still work with honeybees that we train to the balcony outside my office. So, for example, this year, was it this year or last year, I did manage to train honeybees to solve a string pulling task, which in the past we've only been successful to do with bumblebees, but honeybees can do it too. So this is a task where um, an artificial flower is displayed under a glass table so that the bees can see it, but they can't reach it unless they pull a string that's attached to the flower to pull it out from underneath the glass. And honeybees can do this too, it seems.
Has your work inspired people across the world to follow your lines of thought? Have you seen an uptick on research in bee sentience across the globe?
I think so. I think that there's a good number of labs now investigating similar questions with a variety of bee species, and also in many cases using similarly easy to build setups with flight arenas and innovative artificial flower designs in a good number of labs in various countries. So I'm really happy about that.
Okay. And in all the talks that you've given around the world, what's the trickiest question you've yet had?
Well, there are many, of course. We have done a lot of work on social learning, the question to which bees can learn things by copying each other. And there are often good questions from beekeepers that I'm afraid I cannot answer. So, one common question is, can we not make bees learn the appropriate hygienic behavior to cope with varroa mites? And that would be wonderful, of course. We do know that some species of honeybees, Asian hive bees, Apis cerana, cope well with these mites. It is also now clear that in a number of parts of the world, the Western Apis honeybee, Apis mellifera, can cope with the mites. In South Africa, for example. And of course, it would be wonderful if somehow we could basically teach bees to get rid of the mites without deploying an arsenal of potentially harmful chemicals. We have not done work on this particular problem, but I know that it's ongoing in a number of labs, and I've seen at least some suggestive evidence that it might be working, but I hope that people will figure out a solution to this problem soon that is more efficient than all kinds of rather invasive treatments. In a similar kind of vein, of course, beekeepers often ask about how our European honeybees might be able to cope with Asian hornets, and whether there are ways of socially learning the way in which Asian honeybees cope with these hornets by basically forming a ball of live honeybee workers around a hornet and basically cooking her to death by overheating using their flight muscles, the hornet to temperatures that the bees can cope with, but hornets cannot. Again, I'd like to say that this might be possible via social learning, but we lack any evidence so far.
And if there was one thing that you could ask beekeepers to do in watching their bees to look out for any sentience, what would that be?
Well, I mean, in the first instance, it's easy to forget, working with honeybee colonies on a daily basis, just how much of a miracle it is to do what the bees are doing on a basis. Every single flight where an individual leaves the hive, comes back 1, 2, sometimes 3 hours later, from distances as far away as 5, 6, 7 kilometers, sometimes more. The fact that they reliably solve these navigation tasks that come with it without directions, from being able to ask strangers for directions without a mobile phone, without a map. If any of you try wild nature hiking without any kind of technology, you'll appreciate just how easy it is to get lost, and yet bees solve these tasks on a daily basis. Every tiny drop of honey that they manufacture, of course, is the work of lots of individuals solving all of these navigation tasks, being essentially little economists and finding the best flowers. And it's easy to forget how much goes into these commodities like nectar that we harvest in the form of honey, how much brain work goes into this. You get a much better appreciation for these things, of course, once you see bees as individuals. So sometimes it's just fun to give a few individual workers some little paint dots on their backs and observe them as they're leaving and returning from long forays, um, reliably laden with nectar and pollen and so on. Once you recognize that these individuals are actually ones that fly to particular destinations reliably and coming back after a precise time and so on, I think you understand more about their little minds.
Lars, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm sure BeeCraft readers are going to really enjoy listening to this. And Richard and I will certainly want to visit you as soon as is convenient to hear what your current students are up to. Thank you very much indeed, Lars. Really grateful for your time.
Thank you for your interest. Have a great day.
Thank you, Lars.